So I've seen a number of people say that they would never use ChatGPT or encourage their kids, their students, I shouldn't say kids or students, never to use ChatGPT. And I've seen this argument play out time and time again. And it doesn't necessarily work because there is there is the then what issue that happens, right? So you can ban it and it might work for your particular microcosm, but there is the then what, right? So we are teaching people to live within a world that is complicated. And if you ban things, inevitably you make it a moral decision where you say this is right or wrong. And inevitably, those people are going to slip up within a complicated world. And they are going to have to face the decision, what do I do when I actually use this in the real world, quote unquote, real world? And how do I handle it when I know I'm not supposed to do this? And what it does is it creates a right or wrong scenario. And it makes people feel guilty when they do slip up and they actually use something. And it creates this dynamic where people are afraid to speak up and actually to say that they do use it, or they are afraid to talk about it, or they never acknowledge it. I grew up in a very, my parents were wonderful. They did absolutely the best they could with the limited amount of resources that they had. There were 6 kids in the family. It was a big family and they didn't have money, and they're trying to do their best, right? They weren't, these type of parents that read all the books or anything like that, but they did a really good job. But they were also very, very strict. What this happened or what this did, and I don't fault them for this because I understand. I understand the desire to ban things. I understand the desire to create very strict guidelines. And I'm not saying like that there are guidelines in the sense of, helping and encouraging people to sort of have best practices, but very strict is that it was morally wrong to do something. And what that does is it sets you up for when you go away, that you have these very strong desires to get everything that you were ever told that is wrong and bad to actually do. Right. And you have this very strong desire to get pulled towards this psychology of it. And you go and you do those things even more. And you create the situation, this dynamic where it feels morally wrong to pursue whatever it is, right? Like you name it, overeating or, having candy or whatever. It creates this dynamic where you know it's wrong. And so you do it. But then because it's wrong, you do it even more because you don't want to acknowledge and talk about it. So I don't think banning anything is ever the way to go. And I think if you were to look at the sort of basic psychology research, they would never encourage you to do that. And instead, what you want to do is teach people to live within a complicated world and say, listen, you have all of these options, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad in terms of dealing with these things. And it's your choice to deal with this complicated world. But I'm here to support you with whatever you actually choose to do. And there's not going to be a right answer with the thing that you actually choose to do. But there is, whether it's, I don't like the terminology weaknesses anymore, or, that there's negatives or cons or anything like that. But there's different traits and features of pursuing something. And sometimes we don't want to do that because other people are going to view it as not so great. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong or incorrect or guilty in all situations. So I would rather, instead of teaching that there is that there is that it's morally wrong to ban something, morally wrong to pursue something, say that, it's complicated. And let's see what the weaknesses actually are by pursuing this thing. And let's really push it. And let's see what happens when we actually go that route and see if it breaks or see if what we do is imperfect or that there is some issues that come up. So rather than simply banning it, just saying, what, I'm never going to pursue this thing, view it as simply a curiosity. In that this curiosity, yeah, once you pursue it, you realize, yeah, it's really not that great in all situations, but in other situations, it's the most glorious thing in the whole wide world. And the only way that you can teach that it's pros and cons and that there is glory to it often, and it's magical often, is to get people to use it and to get slipped up and to say, oh, well, gosh, that this was a moment where it didn't work out as planned and it did something really strange. Let's have a conversation about it. And maybe we can figure out what to do. So this teaches people to deal with a complicated world that is constantly changing and constantly full of rules that emerge where people say it's right or wrong. And it teaches them a muscle of what do we do in this complicated world? And rather than saying, I'm going to determine that this is right or wrong. And if you violate this thing, right, then you're the one that's wrong, right? Instead, say, let's come to a mutual conclusion that this is very complicated and that you can go through life trying to listen to what other people are telling you. And that if you don't do it the right way that they're telling you, then you're somehow defunct or a defect. Or you say, let's work at this. Let's say, you know what, this is a problem sometimes and it doesn't work as intended, but it's going to get better. And we're going to have to use it at any given moment when we pursue this world that we live in. Let's figure out when it's the right time to use it and when it's the wrong time to use it. Or maybe that there are these moments where we say, you know what? If we use it in this way, it doesn't feel right. But if we use it in a different way, it does feel right. It is being used in the right way. So I am completely sympathetic to wanting to ban things, but I don't think it helps people out in a long-term world where it's complicated and that there's a lot of different messy things that pop up along the way.